The best time to plant a tree is yesterday. The next best time is today. This is known by Chinese proverb, and it means that it's never too late, right? It'd be better if you planted the tree yesterday, because that means today you'd have a big tree, or 20 years ago, if you've already planted it in the past. But if you haven't planted a tree in the past, you know what? The present is going to be the past someday. So if you plant a tree now, then it will grow. So this is a great way to look at other things too. Like, it's never too late to do things. So it's never too late to say, learn a new instrument or learn a language. It'd be nice if you already, you'd already learned that instrument, you could play it now. But if you learn it now, you'll be able to play it in the future. So it's a nice, I always have liked that proverb, and it's about trees, and I really like trees. Today's lesson, we are going to be talking about trees. Now, trees are an integral part of life, of all life on Earth. But as you know, they're facing a lot of stress from deforestation, people cutting them down, pollution has had a really big impact on trees, and just a lot of stresses that threaten these trees, which also, in turn, because it threatens the trees, it means that these stresses threaten our very existence ourselves. Now, trees are a part of God's creation, so we really shouldn't take them for granted. They are providers of life itself. So they are really important. They provide, not only, it's really hot, I think by the time you watch this video, the weather's supposed to dry out a little bit, be cooler, but it's still really warm right now. So trees provide shade, something as simple as that. Wonderful. But they also provide the very oxygen that we breathe, the air. They take in CO2 and they output oxygen. So without trees and plants, we wouldn't be able to breathe. So they're pretty important to us. So to start, before we get, I'm going to be reading a story, but before I do that, I just thought I'd get you up and moving a little bit, and you could almost call this a little bit of yoga, tree yoga. We'll do some tree yoga just to get started. So to get up, I'll do it too. And what we're going to do is we're going to make trees with your body. And if you're watching this with someone else, feel free to sort of do this jointly, and you can both make trees. So you can both make one tree. You'll have a little more arms to work with, so you'll have more branches on your tree than I'll have on my fiddle. But that's okay. So first, think about an oak tree. What's the oak tree? Oak trees are really strong and sturdy, right? So put my legs apart, legs apart, hands up in the air, strength. Strength. Beautiful. Now, what about how about a weeping willow? Weeping willow, because I used to get them from my rabbit school. We take down little branches of the willow at my school. I had a lot of dew on them. They have these long, flowing branches, almost like waterfalls, right? So think of these long, just curves. So maybe curve your body over and your arms hanging down. You're weeping willow, blowing and branches going around in the wind. Oh, it's good at that. Right. Finally, think about what kind of trees we have. A lot around here are spruce trees. So they're very tall and straight. I'm looking at spruce trees outside my window right now in the evenings. I like to go out and watch them swaying in the breeze. They're very tall. And the branches don't go right like some of the deciduous trees, like the oak trees. They go straight out. Maybe your fingers are all pine needles. Wiggle your fingers around. All right. I got moving a little bit. We will continue with the lesson, and I will read the story, but before I get into it, think about, as we continue with the lesson, think about your relationship to nature in general and to trees. Do you have a relationship with trees? How do you interact with the trees that are around you, or maybe a very specific tree? Is there a tree you like to climb? And in terms of, so that's for yourself, but think about all of us. Think about what trees offer to us and how we depend on trees for our survival. So the story I'm going to read is called Tree in the Ancient Forest. And oops, mirror image here. And it is by Carol Reed Jones, and the illustrations are by Christopher Canyon. And feel free, the story builds on itself and things are repeated, and feel free to read along with me as we get to the part that's repeated over and over. This is the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. These are the roots that draw food from the soil to nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. These are the tiny underground truffles that grow on the roots that draw food from the soil to nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. These are the voles and the mice that tunnel and eat the tiny underground truffles that grow on the roots and that draw food from the soil to nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. This is the owl that flies at night, that hunts the voles and mice that tunnel and eat the tiny underground truffles that grow on roots that draw food from the soil to nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. These are the sleepy owlets that are fed by the owl that flies by night, that hunts the voles and mice that tunnel and eat the tiny underground truffles that grow on roots that draw food from the soil to nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. This is a hollow tree, home of the sleepy owlets that are fed by the owl that flies at night and hunts the voles and mice that tunnel and eat the tiny underground truffles that grow on roots that draw food from the soil to nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. This is the woodpecker searching for ants that started the hollow in the tree, the home of the sleepy owlets that are fed by the owl that flies at night, that hunts for the vole and mice that tunnel and eat the tiny underground truffles that grow on roots that draw food from the soil to nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. This is the saucy, chattering squirrel that scolds the woodpecker, searching for ants that started the hollow in the tree, home of the sleepy owlets that are fed by the owl that flies at night, that hunts the voles and mice that tunnel and eat the tiny underground truffles that grow on roots that draw food from the soil to nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. This is the hungry, stealthy martin that stalks the saucy, chattering squirrel, that scolds the woodpecker, searching for ants that started the hollow in the tree, home of the sleepy owlets that are fed by the owl that flies at night, that hunts the voles and mice that tunnel and eat the tiny underground truffles that grow on the roots that draw food from the soil to nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. These are the fir cones that fall from a branch and startle the hungry, stealthy martin that stalks the saucy, chattering squirrel that scolds the woodpecker, searching for ants that started the hollow in the tree, home of the sleepy owlets that are fed by the owl that flies at night, that hunt the voles and mice that tunnel and eat the tiny underground truffles that grow on the roots that draw food from the soil to nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. This is the 300-year-old tree that grows the fir cones that fall from a branch and startle the hungry, stealthy martin that stalks the saucy, chattering squirrel that scolds the woodpecker, searching for ants that started the hollow in the tree, home of the sleepy owlets that are fed by the owl that flies at night, that hunts the voles and mice that tunnel and eat the tiny underground truffles that grow on roots and draw food from the soil nourish the 300-year-old tree that grows in the ancient forest. And that's the end of the story. So this is also relates back to the lesson we did on Earth Day, right? About how everything is interconnected. So think about all the characters in the story, they're all dependent on each other. And what I love about this particular story is how it brings it back to the original tree again, right? So it's not just outward of how things are dependent on one over each other. It's not like line, it's circle, right? Because that tree is eventually providing things that it gets by taking things it needs, right? So it goes all the way around in a circle. And this book, by the way, developed for the Southwest Harbor Library. If you want to check it out, it also includes in the back, can't really see it. It includes a list of all the characters that are in the story. So the Douglas fir tree, the truffles, and it tells more about each of those characters or creatures or plants, and tells you a little bit more about them and their role in this circle, ecological circle that occurs in the forest. So how does that make you feel? Did you like it? Think about some of the trees that are around your house and what sort of plants and animals might be dependent on them. I know the squirrel in this story made me think about the squirrels that are around my house, and they certainly take advantage of the trees for the pine cones and for safety, right? They can run up around. Whenever my dog goes out and she sees the squirrel, she goes, the tree, the squirrel just runs up the tree to get away from the dog, and it's safe up in the branches. And think about, so what are some other ways you can think of that trees are, the trees that are around you and that are around on Mount Desert Island are part of this larger circle? And think about any of your favorite trees. If a certain tree, what is yours? As I said, remember before, earlier in the lesson, I was talking about your relationship to trees. How do you interact with the trees around you? And do you have a favorite tree? So when I was growing up, there was this big old maple tree that filled the window of my bedroom. It was these big, like 3-pane window, and it looked right down on this tree, and I loved it. And at night, the outside lights would light it up. And so in the fall, I'd be walking up the stairs, and I could see through the bedroom door, through the windows, just color of all the fall of all the color of the fall autumn tree. And in the winter, it would be all, the branches would be all bare, but they'd all be covered in snow. And so I always enjoyed that particular tree. So is there a particular tree that you really like? Or is there a particular area of this island, a particular stand of maybe a bunch of birches on a trail, or maybe a hemlock grove? Is there a particular section of trees or area of trees that you really enjoy? So we're going to be talking more about trees in future lessons, but I thought this Trees of the Ancient Forest was a great introduction to trees. So until the next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to your others, and have a great week.